There is a fence post in my backyard that has been in the ground since 1971. I know because my father put it there and I watched him do it. The post is Douglas fir. It has never been painted. It has never been sealed. It has never had a drop of commercial preservative applied to it in 53 years. I knocked on it this past spring and it rang like a bell, solid and dry all the way through. 3 feet away from it, there are 2 pressure-treated pine posts I installed myself in 2009. They are soft at the base. One of them twists in my hand when I grip it. I replaced them last fall. I will replace them again before the decade is out. A few months ago, I would not have been able to explain that difference. Now I can. And the explanation comes down to a powder you can buy for under $1 a pound at any farm supply or feed store in the country. Blue powder. Looks like crushed turquoise. Been sitting on the same shelf since your great-grandfather's time. Here is what I know now. Copper sulfate, mixed correctly and applied to bare wood before any coating goes on, binds with wood fibers at a molecular level and makes the wood chemically hostile to every organism that causes rot. Not for 10 years, not for 20, for decades. The wood itself becomes the preservative. And at the end of this video, I am going to share a specific preparation method I found in a 1928 technical report from the Forest Products Laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin, a method that was standard practice in government timber construction for 15 years and then simply dropped from every manual printed after 1944. It works on the deck you already have, the fence you already built, the shed that is starting to look tired. You do not need to tear anything out. Let me start with the part of this story that nobody talks about. I had always assumed that wood rot was caused by moisture. Water gets in, wood breaks down. End of story. That is what every product in the stain and sealer aisle is built around. Keep the water out, but that is not actually what kills wood. Wood is destroyed by organisms. Fungi, primarily, and the bacteria that create the conditions fungi need to colonize. Moisture is not the enemy. Moisture is the delivery vehicle. What moves through wet wood and consumes it from the inside is biological, and this distinction matters enormously because it means that a coating designed to repel water is fighting the wrong enemy. The fungi that rot a fence post do not care about your waterproof sealer. They get in through the end grain, through nail holes, through the tiniest surface crack. Once they are inside, they are already past the coating you paid $40 a gallon for. The Forest Products Laboratory in Madison, Wisconsin, is one of the oldest continuous wood science research institutions in the world. It was established in 1910 by the federal government specifically to address the crisis of rotting infrastructure, bridges, railroad ties, telegraph poles, mine timbers, barn framing, and government buildings were failing far faster than anyone had predicted. In 1912, the lab's first director, Carlisle P. Winslow, published an internal assessment that described the scale of the problem directly. He estimated that the United States was losing more than 3 billion board feet of structural timber per year to fungal decay. Not to weather, to organisms, to biology. The solution, the lab documented in its early reports, was not a surface coating. It was a penetrating mineral treatment. And the mineral that showed the most consistent results across 47 timber species in the lab's own testing was copper sulfate. Copper sulfate penetrates. It does not sit on the surface of the wood like paint or stain. It travels with moisture down into the fibers, bonds with the cellulose matrix, and stays there. Once it is inside the wood, it creates a mineral environment that is chemically toxic to the enzymes fungi use to break down cellulose. The organisms cannot metabolize the fiber. They move on. The wood stands. The mechanism has been understood for almost 2 centuries. Auguste Boucherie, a French chemist, documented it in 1,838 inches, a published monograph on timber preservation. He injected fresh-cut logs with dilute copper sulfate solution and tested them against untreated controls over a 12-year period. His treated timbers showed no measurable fungal decay. His controls were rotting by year 3. That paper sat in European engineering literature for decades. American railroads and telegraph companies eventually adopted versions of his process in the 1880s to treat poles and ties. By the early 1900s, it was standard practice for any timber that would be in ground contact or exposed to continuous moisture. But here is what I did not understand until I started pulling the original Forest Products Lab reports. The copper sulfate treatment that worked for railroad ties and telegraph poles was never translated into a simple, cheap, homeowner-accessible method. It was industrial. It required pressure equipment, large volume tanks, specialized handling. For the ordinary homeowner with a fence and a shed, that method was out of reach. And nobody in the post-war decades bothered to develop the simplified version. Because by then, pressure treatment with chromated copper arsenate had arrived and the industry had moved on. What the pressure treatment industry never told you is that the CCA process and its successors are designed for lumber that has not yet been cut or installed. They work on raw wood processed in a controlled industrial environment. They are nearly useless on wood that is already in place, already framed, already in the ground, already weathered. The post that is starting to go soft in your fence line cannot be sent back to the mill for retreatment. You are supposed to pull it and replace it with a new one. That is the business model. When I realized this, the first thing I thought about was my own yard. That 2009 fence going soft. The deck boards showing dark stains at the nail holes where moisture was working its way in. The garden shed with siding that bent slightly when I pressed it. Wood that should have been solid cedar going punky after 15 years. I had painted that shed. I had stained it. I had done everything the cans told me to do. And none of it had addressed the biology working inside the wood from the moment I drove the first screw. I want to tell you what I did first, because it is something you can start this week without a permit, without a contractor, and for under $20. I went to the feed store and bought a 2-pound bag of copper sulfate crystals from the agricultural section. It is sold as a root killer for drains, as a fungicide for livestock, as a garden treatment for pH adjustment. It has been on that shelf for 100 years. 2 pounds cost me about $4. I bought a cheap pump garden sprayer, the 1-gallon kind, for $8 at the hardware store. I mixed 1 pound of the crystals into 1 gallon of warm water and stirred until they dissolved completely. The solution turns a vivid blue, the color of a swimming pool. I wore rubber gloves and safety glasses. Copper sulfate solution will stain skin and should not go in your eyes. I am not a chemist, and I am not telling you this is without any precaution at all. But the precautions are the same ones you take with any basic garden chemical. Gloves, glasses, keep it away from your mouth. I sprayed every piece of weathered wood on my shed with that solution, concentrating on the end grain wherever boards were cut, on the areas around nail and screw holes, and on the lower 2 feet of every vertical board where moisture climbs from the ground. I let it dry for 48 hours. The wood turned faintly blue-green. I sprayed a second coat. I let that dry for another 48 hours. Then I applied a standard exterior primer and painted over it normally. The visual result was identical to any other paint job. But what was happening underneath the paint was fundamentally different. The copper sulfate had penetrated the fibers. It had bonded. Any moisture that now gets past the paint surface travels into wood that is already mineralized against the organisms that cause rot. The biology cannot take hold. That was 3 years ago. I checked those shed boards this past fall. The areas I treated are still firm, still solid, still showing no sign of soft spots or dark staining at the fasteners. The sections I did not get to on that first pass, a corner I ran out of solution on and did not go back to, those boards are showing the same deterioration pattern I had before. But copper sulfate solution, the simple spray method, is only the first layer. And what I found inside a specific 1928 Forest Products Laboratory Technical Circular changes what is possible for wood that is already damaged. Technical Circular number 17 from the Forest Products Laboratory was published in Madison, Wisconsin in 1928. I found a scanned copy through the National Agricultural Library's Historical Document Archive. The author was a wood technologist named George Mangan Reitz, who spent his career at the lab studying field failures of treated timber in ground contact. The circular was aimed at maintenance engineers for government facilities, rail yards, bridges, and military installations. It described a method Reitz called end-grain saturation priming, which he developed specifically for timber that was already installed, already partially weathered, and showing early signs of incipient decay. The method is this. You identify the points where moisture and organisms are entering the wood. For a fence post, that is the top of the post and the soil line. For a deck board, it is every fastener hole and every cut end. For shed siding, it is the lower edges and butt joints. You do not cut the wood out. You do not replace the section. You attack the entry points directly. Reitz specified a concentration of 2 ounces of copper sulfate per quart of water, which is approximately twice the strength of what I had been using in my general spray treatment. He specified that this solution should be applied hot, between 100 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit, not boiling, but as hot as you would use for a strong cup of tea. The heat does two things. It keeps the copper sulfate fully dissolved at a higher concentration, and it temporarily opens the pores of the wood through thermal expansion, allowing the solution to travel further into the fiber before the wood cools and contracts around it. He specified using a small brush or a medical-style bulb syringe to apply the hot solution directly into drill holes bored at a 45-degree downward angle into the top of any post or vertical member, 2 or 3 holes spaced across the top surface, each about 6 inches deep, each filled with solution, and then plugged with a wooden dowel and exterior wood glue. The solution does not evaporate. It does not wash out. It sits in the core of the wood, slowly diffusing outward through the surrounding fibers over months and years. Reitz documented treated posts that showed zero measurable decay over an 11-year observation period in ground contact conditions in the Pacific Northwest, one of the most aggressive decay environments in North America. That circular was reprinted in 1931 and again in 1939. After 1944, it disappeared from the Active Forest Products Laboratory publication list. I cannot tell you that was a deliberate decision. What I can tell you is that by 1944, the chromated copper arsenate pressure treatment industry was fully operational, and the market for a field-applicable homeowner method using cheap copper sulfate was not in anyone's commercial interest to develop. The modern version of Reitz's method that I have been using is this. I drill 2 or 3 angled holes into the top of any post that I am trying to stabilize. I heat a quart of water to just below simmering, dissolve 2 ounces of copper sulfate crystals fully, and draw the solution into a large turkey baster or bulb syringe. I fill each hole slowly, letting the wood draw the liquid in before I add more. I repeat until the hole holds liquid without absorbing it, which tells me the fiber around the hole is saturated. I plug the holes with hardwood dowels, cut slightly proud of the surface and glued with weatherproof exterior wood glue, then trim them flush with a chisel. On the exterior, the post looks untouched. Inside, the fiber has been fundamentally changed. I used this method on 4 fence posts this past fall that were showing early softness at the top. 2 of them I treated, 2 I left for comparison. By spring, the 2 treated posts had firmed up noticeably as the moisture content dropped and the copper sulfate had time to diffuse and bond. The 2 untreated posts continued to deteriorate on the same trajectory. Reitz estimated in his circular that end-grain saturation priming on posts showing early decay could extend service life by 30 to 50 years. His numbers came from field observation data across government timber installations from 1912 to 1928. 16 years of field data. Not laboratory simulation. Actual posts in actual ground in actual climate. I spent years buying the products that were supposed to protect the wood on my property. I counted it up once, not counting paint. Just the sealers, the stains, the wood hardeners, the end grain sealers, the penetrating oils. Between $1,995 and last year I had spent somewhere above $800 on products designed to do what 2 pounds of copper sulfate crystals from the farm store can do better and more permanently. My father's fence post from 1971 is still standing because he treated it before he set it. He mixed copper sulfate crystals into a bucket of water and stood the post in it for 3 days before it ever went into the ground. He told me that when I was a child. I did not understand what he was doing or why. I did not ask enough questions. I spent 30 years replacing posts that he would have treated once and left alone. If you want to see exactly how I started applying these old methods around my own home, I put everything together in one place. I call it the Buried Home Manual. It is nothing complicated. Just the old methods I wish someone had handed me the day I bought my first house. The ones that actually work, cost almost nothing, and have been quietly forgotten for 50 years. You can check it out below if you want to go deeper. One thing before you go, down in the comments, I want you to tell me this. Is there a piece of wood on your property right now? A post, a beam, a sill, a deck board, something you have already replaced once or are about to replace again, that you think this might have saved if you had known it 10 years ago? Tell me specifically what it was and how long it lasted. Leave that in the comments. I read every one of them. And the patterns I see in those answers are what guides what I cover next. Subscribe, because the next video is something I have been sitting on for 2 months. A specific method for keeping a poured concrete foundation dry from the outside, using a mineral that Roman builders mixed into their mortar and that modern builders stopped specifying in 1958. Not a sealer, not a membrane. A mineral that bonds with calcium and becomes more waterproof the wetter it gets. I found it in a 1931 Portland Cement Association technical bulletin, and the results on the foundations I have seen it applied to are something I am still processing. I will see you there.